title of today's session is Adapting NUFYP EAP Materials. There's an inspirational quote there for you. Every teacher is a materials developer. I do think that is true on NUFYP. I think most people, or all people, do tend to adapt and create their own materials. Today's session aims, first of all, we'd like to discuss adapting materials to improve integrating skills across the reading and writing and listening and speaking lessons. And we'll do this by looking at one individual lesson, and we'll just talk a little bit about ways that we could adapt it. The second aim is to discuss meeting the needs of students through increased TF cooperation. And this is the activity at the end. It's more of a discussion, just thinking about how we can improve cooperation across the skills. Just to begin with, a little bit of background about the principles of course design, about EAP and NUFYP. So, as I'm sure you're all aware, EAP is an English for general academic purposes program, and it's also known as a wide-angle approach. And this is because we are preparing students for a wide variety of undergraduate degrees. It is also widely considered as the most appropriate approach for foundation studies. The academic writing course takes a genre approach to academic writing, with the essay as the discourse entity for analysis. And as you know, we go on and we have two particular essays. The academic reading course understands the complexity of reading academic reading articles, reports, journal articles, and as such we aim to improve the top-down and bottom-up processes so students themselves can interact and use academic sources for their own purposes. The academic listening and speaking course is based around 4 common spoken genres at a university, so lectures and note-taking, seminar, a presentation, and a viva. And obviously we aim to prepare students to be able to function within these genres. Moving on to the materials. So the materials development are obviously underpinned by these course syllabus design philosophy. And the materials are authentic, real world and relevant, or at least we hope they are. They are constructive, sequential and interlinked. This is a particular area we've been trying to improve, and that is the purpose for today, obviously, to try and encourage more integration across the skills. But within materials development, we are trying to improve integration across the skills. The materials promote student use of higher ordered cognitive processes. Lawrence briefly mentioned moving on from knowledge, understanding, onto the synthesis, application at the top. Again, relating back to this morning's session, they are aligned with each other and the learning outcomes. And obviously this is something we've worked very hard on this year, is trying to improve clear lesson aims and direct links to the course learning outcomes. And finally, they should provide challenge, interest and motivation to learn. And hopefully they do. I just want to talk very briefly about how we've tried to improve integration across the skills this year. And these are a few examples from semester 1. So for example, in week 1, the lesson types of academic sources. This is a lesson based on the 6 preparatory project academic sources that they can use. And the theme of all these sources is wind power. Okay, so that directly links to the listening and speaking wind power lesson, where students have built up knowledge of the subject and then they go on to talk about it in a town hall debate situation. Another example is evaluating sources. So students use criteria. In our case, we use CRAP to evaluate sources to decide whether or not they are appropriate. And then this is interlinked with critical listening, where students will watch a listening which on the surface seems academic, but they'll use CRAP to decide whether or not it in fact is. And then in week 5, another example is there's types of evidence used to support claims. It's a new lesson. The reading text from this is all about big data. and then this is thematically interlinked with the big data listening and speaking lesson, also in week 5. So there are attempts to integrate these skills through the materials, and then we're going to talk about how you can do that today. First of all, just in your groups, I'm sure you've all got particular feelings about this, but how do you feel about the current situation of skill integration across the reading and writing course, the listening and speaking course? For William, you'll have to freestyle a little bit, okay? So have a discussion, see what you think. Hans and I will have a wander around. Does anyone want to offer, just very briefly, their opinion on current integration? Or do you want me to summarise what I heard? So, for example...
My initial comment was that there hasn't been much integration.
Yes.
Okay, exactly. Yeah. So previously, in the past, reading and writing, listening and speaking were kept in silos, essentially. This year, we are trying to improve integration, and I guess the grand idea would be to try and replicate what students will be doing at university. They'd be listening to a lecture about a topic, they'd be reading academic sources about the same topic, then they would be expected to go on and do some sort of production, be it writing or speaking, on that particular topic. And then that is ideally what we should be doing over the next few years. The idea is semester 2, that's the route we'd like to take. Okay, we need to move on. So we're going to now look at a particular lesson from EAP, and Hans is going to talk a little bit about the lesson, and we'll see how we can adapt it to integrate the skills.
So, as Matt said, everybody here is a materials adapter, materials user. The materials are there as a structure to the course. We can adapt them, we can take the stuff out, we can put other stuff in. How do we do that, and what are the sort of prime aims and objectives of that? If you're familiar with the staging your argument lesson from semester 1, I think it's in week 3 now.
Yeah.
It's a lesson that develops argument criteria and to assess and evaluate a solution. I think most people will have come across it, if not have done it. Obviously, new staff, it'll be new to you. It looks at a low-tech solution directly applicable to the problem of landmines, which remain problematic throughout the world. It has a lead-in which deals with the topic of landmines, and it considers the problem in general terms, and then looks at the specific solution in terms of, as I say, this low-tech solution that's been put forward. Okay, this is a very brief outline of the lesson itself, just to familiarise you with it, or to remind you of what maybe you've done last semester. I'm going to walk through it just so you get an idea of what the students are actually doing, and then how the materials can be adapted and further exploited. Okay, so on the lesson itself, basically you've got where are landmines most frequently found, why are landmines a major problem, and what are the best solutions. Okay, so discussion, and as I say, the background and leading into the actual topic itself. After that general discussion, the input, there is a video which puts forward the idea of this contraption here, which will explode landmines. It's called a mine cap, and the students watch the video.
Using cheap materials that we found. So this very windy desert became our playground. Most people who live in Kabul will know somebody who has been hurt or killed by a landmine. After the loss of my father, my mother felt it would be too dangerous for me to stay, so she smuggled us out. After 4 years of traveling, I arrived in the Netherlands. I was accepted as a refugee. Now, as an adult, working as a product designer, I use my background to inspire my projects. It has been calculated that it costs about $1,200 to clear a single landmine. So I designed a prototype that I hope to realize in places like Afghanistan. The total cost of its material is about 40 euros. It moves using the power of the wind. When it rolls over an anti-personnel landmine, it's heavy enough to detonate the explosive.
So initially, students are looking at it and saying, yeah, it's a good idea. And on the face of it, it seems like a good idea. Then they're encouraged to work a little bit harder and evaluate it in terms of actual specific criteria. So in terms of the prep project, students have to develop an argument and to use criteria to evaluate whether that argument is correct or not, and they are putting forward that logic using those criteria and backing up with support in order to put forward their actual argument. So they are encouraged to look at the minecat farm and to evaluate it using criteria. The criteria they put in the box, so they develop their own ideas. They then work on the idea that, is this really a good solution to the problem? And they have to analyse that. So really in terms of the advantages and potential problems. So as they develop those ideas and as those ideas are evaluated in terms of the criteria they use, they then find out that it's probably not going to be the greatest idea invented. So, for example, the criteria that they use would be straightforward cost. They do a comparison. That's a fairly simplistic one. They look at terrain, they look at other things involved in the actual project itself. So, going from what appears at the beginning to be a very good idea to, no, this would have to be rejected in military terms. For the people who are new, I think we have 3 people here, is this a reading and writing or a listening and speaking lesson?
This is more listening and speaking.
Listening and speaking?
Yeah.
Listening and speaking. Listening and speaking. Okay. It's actually in the reading and writing in week 3. There is an element of reading and writing involved in it as well, but yes, on the face of it, it looks very much like a listening and speaking activity, doesn't it?
And I guess the point is it shouldn't particularly matter if it is across the reading, writing or listening and speaking.
Yeah. So we're going to ask you now, how could you adapt the materials with additional activities? And you can work in groups, in all the best traditions, and just fill in listening and speaking, reading and writing. Just brainstorm some ideas about the activities that could be used to develop this in both of those areas, reading and writing, listening and speaking.
This specific video.
This specific idea, lesson.
Perhaps they could then, perhaps in the speaking, they could have a kind of pyramid discussion, and sort of vote on which is the most effective criteria they wish to use before they get to that. So if it was this scenario, each group would come up with different criteria, then present it to the group, which will be here. Perhaps, I don't know, the class vote on what they think is the most effective criteria, and then they go into another stage.
You could extend outwards rather than dealing with this topic. You could take the skills, the evaluation, the criteria, and move it on to a different.
For example, ocean plastic, there are several inventions about that, and it's sort of environmentally related.
I mean, the lesson, the first leading task was a guiding discovery. Well, if you remember, it was a lesson where the students said what's the best file, what's the lecture is meaningless. You actually consider what the criteria by which you're judging is best, so you could apply those criteria to say.
We're bringing back together some really interesting ideas there, and we put some of those on the board, and there's stuff that we certainly hadn't thought of. So we've got speaking analysis of a popular topic. Okay, we can actually expand the topic itself. There's a geography discussion, because we have a geographer in the room here. So the actual problem and how that impacts both on societies and economics of a variety of countries. Princess Diana came up there, which I thought was quite interesting. She's out there as or was out there, out there at the forefront of banning landmines. Summary of the situation, that would be maybe a presentation that people could do. Role play, pitching the idea. This is a great idea. I want funding for it. I want to develop this, and let's go down that route. Reading and writing, we've got researching other solutions, alternative solutions. Alternative uses, again, with military personnel. Preparation of research, so as a task prior to the lesson, we could be doing some reading as well. A report on the actual MindCap on itself. Advertisement for it, linked in with the sort of the pitching the idea type of thing. So there is backwards and forwards movement between the activities that could be used there. Some of those are actually maybe suggested within the materials, others as materials developers and as experienced teachers you can use yourself. We had a few ideas, but I think we covered most of them. Presentation, formal presentation or Dragon's Den style, discussion of improvements, landmine debate, role play based on the military assessment, the report, scientific writing describing the process of how it works in scientific terms, modifications and solutions, research on landmine clearing, things like thermal imaging and stuff that already exists and people are using to different solutions. So those are other possible ones, but I think most of those you've covered. Extending the materials, so we're adapting what we've already got and using other activities, extending it that little bit further. Hassani himself has gone back to the drawing board on this one, and he's been rejected by the military because as the students have evaluated, the thing doesn't work with the precision and the effectiveness that is required. So he's gone back and he's developed a drone CAFON based on this idea.
In 2012, we have launched our first Kickstarter campaign. It is called the MindCAFON. A low-cost wind-powered anti-landmine detonator. It rolls along in a desert. When it hits a landmine, it blows itself up and it destroys the landmine at the same time. After 3 years of hard work, we brought our mission to the next level. Now we are very excited to introduce you our newest robotic invention, the MindCAFON drone. It is an airborne demining system which aims to reduce landmines in less than 10 years globally. The MindCAFON drone flies above a dangerous area. It generates a 3D map. Then it detects landmines with a metal detector and GPS coordinates. The drone has a robotic arm which places detonators on top of a landmine and blows them up from a safe distance. These three methodologies combined makes the MindCAFON drones up to 20 times faster than the traditional technologies. It is safer and up to 200 times cheaper. Imagine if we could fly with hundreds of MindCAFON drones all over the affected landscapes worldwide and free the world from landmines.
There we've got another way of dealing with the problem of landmines, which is actually developed from that previous one. So students could research this development, and they can also apply the same processes that they've done on the actual lessons which are in the materials. So in this way, we're meeting one of the valid assessment criteria, 5.5 3.3 for those of you who want to look it up. Core syllabus will have explicit organising principle with a coherent set of components. We've allowed for progression recycling being the major idea there, and transfer of language, knowledge, academic history skills and study competence to target academic contexts. So they're doing basically the same lesson with the extended material. Whether they've researched it or whether you've given it to them, fine, but they are actually doing what you want them to do in a different way. Yeah. So that's how just one simple lesson, which is already on the materials, can be extended in a number of ways, and that's what we're asking you to do. Nobody's asking anyone to do this for every lesson. Looking at it and saying, how can I just, within the learning outcomes, how can I use this material just that little bit more effectively, and how can I do it across the skills, whether it be in a reading and writing or in a listening, speaking folder on the materials. Can I do that between the two?
Okay, just a brief summary of some key considerations which you've all actually been talking about when you're adapting the materials. Obviously, you just need to take into consideration student needs, be that student assessment or perhaps strengths and weaknesses. And obviously within these particular areas we can see matching students' assessment through speaking, the report writing, etc., going on to write the prep project, so we are directly meeting their needs. Obviously be aware of the student level. The students are divided into groups based on their writing score, but you will have a variety of students with different levels throughout your class. So yeah, you do need to take in consideration some of the stronger or weaker students. Perhaps you could scaffold the scientific writing, providing vocabulary and structure to help the lower level students. Perhaps the presentation, a formal presentation, is more nerve-jangling and more difficult for the higher level students. A more informal pitching the idea is perhaps a better activity for lower level students. Skill integration, that's exactly what we've been talking about, integrating the material across the skills from reading to writing to listening and speaking. Developing critical thinking, just be aware, obviously within all these activities students are working on higher cognitive processing orders, so they are thinking about things, analysing things, evaluating things. One interesting point came up also, think about localisation, personalisation. How can you make it more interesting for the students? Think about the local context. For example, they could have the debate about landmines, the situation in Kazakhstan. They have not signed up to any treaties. They do use a lot of landmines on the Chinese border. So quite interesting and relevant for the students to talk about that. And finally, going back to what we talked a little bit about this morning, don't forget it's very important, if you are creating extra activities, think back to the course learning outcomes and how do they meet them. It's fairly straightforward, as you can see from the ideas you generated. You can link them back to ideas. The presentation, okay, therefore it has clear course learning outcomes for the presentation. The writing, paraphrasing, summarising, okay, you can quite easily link them back, hopefully, to the course learning outcomes. So that's the last part about trying to think about integrating materials and the example. So moving on to the next part about trying to increase cooperation between TFs to help the students. And this, for the last sort of 5 minutes, I just want you to discuss these 4 questions. So what do you think? What are some possible barriers to integration, particularly in our context? Do you think integrating materials is the responsibility of the teacher or the materials? Do you feel restricted by the location of the materials? A lot of people have mentioned this. Do you think there is enough cooperation at the minute between the reading and writing and listening and speaking TFs? Do you think there should be more? What do you think? And finally, how could you improve the cooperation between your teaching fellow? Lots of different ideas. Just have a 5-minute discussion and we'll just come around and have a chat when we get a short time.
So, how do you integrate that? But I guess they would be doing things.
Do you think integrating materials is the responsibility of the teacher or the materials? Is there a clear answer?
I think it's the responsibility of the teachers, but the materials can make it easier for the teachers to cooperate.
Okay, so the materials need to be designed to help integration. Yeah. Okay.
Other way around.
Other way around.
Materials, the bulk of the responsibility should be on the materials. The teachers decide how they're going to teach in their class.
And then how do you teach on those materials?
Any other comments?
I thought both.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Couldn't decide
Look,
which
yeah,
one was more
it's the
important.
responsibility of both.
Yeah.
Going back to, I guess, what we talked about at the beginning, do you feel restricted by the location of the materials? For example, you're in reading and writing, you're the reading and writing tutor, the listening and speaking tutor. Do people feel restricted by that and they need to only concentrate on these skills? Thoughts? It's the way that the course is designed. I don't think anything's going to change.
If I were teaching reading and writing, I would probably adapt by adding listening and speaking activities just to make the class more sort of active and less boring. So
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and you're certainly free to do that, obviously. These ones are obviously going to have varying answers, but at the minute, depending on your personal experience, any thoughts? What do you think about the cooperation between the reading and writing and listening and speaking tutor? What are your thoughts?
It's very personal, I think. It's how you are, how you teach, how you approach. As we said in the group, some teachers are very close and collaborate weekly, and others prefer to go their own way.
I think for the students it's possibly better to collaborate on cooperate on a weekly basis or whatever. Otherwise, if you're just on your own and you don't really say much to one another, how would you know the other person's experience of a student or a student's having problems or something like that?
Yeah, or what's going on in the class, yeah. I guess the ideal would be as much cooperation as possible, I guess, ideally. Any particular ways that you found that you've been able to cooperate better with your LNS or reading writing tutor?
it might help if you're in the same office or close together.
Okay, yeah, so there's some issues, yeah. It could be geography on a different floor, yeah.
I just get a Google Doc, create a schedule for the whole semester with all the listening, speaking, reading, writing classes, and we just populate the cells for each week as we go along so we can see what each other's doing, and we may need to converse about what we're doing as well to make sure that we're getting things lined up.
What do you mean, what do you populate the
So,
cells with?
So the lessons that you're going to teach. So in week 1, for example, if I'm, I don't know, whatever it is I'm going to teach, I populate the cells with what I'm planning to do. The listening, speaking tutor will do exactly the same, and we can see what each other's planning to teach. And usually do that a week ahead as well. So then, like, if there are any issues or any clashes or crossovers or whatever, then we can see those and we can communicate. So you're kind of forced to see what both of you is doing, and you can talk about it.
Isn't that already done with the course overview? Isn't it already done for us to a certain extent?
Yeah, but teachers do different things in different sequences sometimes, and we don't always follow what's on the drive exactly. So if we write exactly what we're doing in each of these little cells and we share it between us, we can see what each other's doing and discuss it.
Okay, yep. Okay, just some final thoughts, I guess. It was more of a discussion, we don't particularly have the right or wrong answer, but going back to what we said at the beginning, every teaching fellow is a materials developer. You are free to develop materials. The materials on the server are there to be adapted and used. I guess what we're saying, if we do want to increase integration across reading and writing and listening and speaking, it obviously won't work in the old system where that people are stuck in their reading and writing and listening, speaking silos. There would need to be creative cooperation between the teachers. You would need to discuss about what you are doing in this lesson and how it might link across to the listening and speaking lesson. Obviously, be selective. You don't have the time to adapt all materials. Obviously, not all materials can be adapted. They may not suit being changed. And then going back to what Florence was talking about this morning, very important again, if you do adapt materials, create new materials, they do need to be linked back to the original course learning outcomes. Okay, it's very important this year, obviously, for Valley. Any particular questions before we finish? No? Okay, thank you very much.